Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Mark Hemingway has a good piece over at realclearinvestigations.com on 60 Minutes and the departure of Bill Owens from 60 Minutes, which we mentioned briefly in our conversation yesterday about the hit piece that Scott Pelley did over the weekend on Trump as it relates to his executive orders in the direction of law firms that were party to the lawfare against the president over the last 4, 6, 8 years. And it was really rich to see Mark Elias and his firm, focus on that firm as one of those that are besieged by Trump, and Mark Elias as basically James Madison here, standing for the rule of law and constitutional principles. Before you hear from this bottom feeder named Mark Elias, who some people may remember, even from our discussion yesterday, he was the Hillary Clinton attorney in 2016 who hired Fusion GPS, who retained Christopher Steele to put together the infamous Steele dossier that was used as the fodder to try to derail the Trump candidacy and then the Trump presidency for the better part of 2.5 years, even knowing that there was no basis to use that as a basis the way that they did. But now Mark Elias, as I said, is the father of our Constitution.
Donald Trump hates me because I fight hard and I fight for free and fair elections. I insist on fighting for democracy in court, fighting for voting rights in court, and insist on telling the truth about what the outcome of the 2020 election was.
Are there risks in doing the work that you're doing?
I'd be an idiot not to be worried. The question, though, is what do you do? Right? Do you just cower in the corner? Do you just try to disappear? Do you just leave democracy to fend for itself? Or do you stand tall and do the best you can every day to represent your clients and try to preserve the rule of law?
Mark Elias first crossed Trump in 2016. He was the top lawyer for the Clinton campaign. Then in 2020, when Trump and allies challenged the election results, Elias fought in court and won. Trump calls him a thug.
Donald Trump is the walking embodiment of everything that is wrong with the American political system. And so when Donald Trump says that I am unethical or that I am undermining his vision of America, I say, boy, I must be doing something right.
Scott Pelley nicely glossed over Mark Elias' activity in 2016 in referencing him there, didn't he? That was very generous of him. Mark Hemingway, senior writer at realclearinvestigations.com and book editor at thefederalist.com, his latest piece, The Downfall of 60 Minutes and the Biggest Media Scandal You've Never Heard of, which you will soon hear of. Mark, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, glad to be back on.
Does Scott Pelley have it about right that Mark Elias is one of the great guardians of our democracy?
Mark Elias is an unbelievable scumbag. I mean, and the thing is the idea that this started with him crossing Trump is complete nonsense. Mark Elias has been like the Democratic Party's enforcer on election issues for decades, for going back, at least since 2008 that I remember, where he was involved in the infamous Senate race involving Al Franken and Norm Coleman that came down to a couple hundred votes. And Elias just litigated the hell out of that, and Al Franken pulled it out. But we now have substantial evidence, for instance, that a significant number of felons illegally voted and a whole bunch of other things. Franken didn't rightly win that race. And there's been a million other races like that where Elias has gone in and, it's one thing to just, say, hey, I'm a lawyer, I'm doing the best I can for my client. But, he goes out there and he goes into these dodgy election situations and he screws things up and he gets unjust results, because, hey, he's a good lawyer. But, to then turn around and say that I'm the guardian of democracy, it's absolutely insane. And then, of course, what he did in 2016 is just unconscionable. I mean, he knew what he was doing was wrong. Everybody knew what he was doing was wrong. And, he should be held accountable for that.
And so back us out a little bit, because you get into a lot of detail about 60 Minutes and this current imbroglio within the ranks of 60 Minutes with Bill Owens leaving and And,
Yeah.
the typical Scott Pelley and others saying, oh, yeah, journalistic independence, and we're going to do this on behalf of our fallen comrade, Bill Owens, and we don't agree with corporate that's trying to cut a deal with Trump and all this business. So unpack that for us, if you would.
Yeah. Well, so obviously when Bill Owens resigned, I guess it was just over a week ago, there was so much fanfare in the press, defending Bill Owens as this paragon of integrity because, Owens had come out and said that, the corporate bosses at Paramount that own CBS won't let 60 Minutes do its job anymore. They're trying to influence our news operations. And 60 Minutes actually went so far as to basically say that on air, that, he was being forced out for that reason. Well, first, this is, ridiculous. First of all, there have been two major scandals at CBS News just in the past, 8 months or something. First involving Kamala Harris's interview being all chopped up, in a way that made her sound more coherent when everybody knew that they had dishonestly cut it because they put one of her answers online. And the other was this recent scandal where Leslie Stahl, who's allegedly one of the most, prestigious television news journalists, asked a freed Hamas hostage if that Hamas had starved them unintentionally because Israel was depriving Hamas of food, which is insane. I mean, Hamas is an awful terrorist group, and Hamas is stealing all the food that comes into Gaza. So that alone was crazy in and of itself. But my story goes into a rather complicated story involving a big scandal from Bill Owens some years earlier to try and help the campaign of Hillary Clinton in 2016.
That's what I was going to say. When do you think the turning point was, when 60 Minutes began to decline in credibility?
That's a really good question. I mean, obviously, the Rathergate scandal in 2004, if, people remember that, it's crazy. I now work with people that were, in diapers or don't remember that. But it was a huge deal at the time where, it was September of 2004 with the election going full steam. There was this big controversy over John Kerry trying to claim that he was this, heroic Vietnam vet for spending, I think less than 4 months in country and lying about, the way he'd gotten a number of his medals. And so 60 Minutes concocted this story, suggesting that, George W. Bush's Texas Air National Guard Service, which already, I think everyone sort of understood that was him trying to dodge the draft, was, somehow marked with, I think it was discipline errors and all this other stuff. And so 60 Minutes concocted these documents and put them on the air saying that, George W. Bush should have been disciplined and he got all these privileges as a rich kid, when it turned out that the documents were completely fabricated, and it ended the career of 60 Minutes. 60 Minutes Dan Rather, who was maybe the biggest television news broadcaster at the time. But what was interesting is 60 Minutes at the time did a huge investigation, a big public culpa. There was a whole, they took it very seriously. And then ever since then, there's been a series of scandals like the one I wrote about where CBS hasn't taken anything seriously at all.
Yeah, that is actually interesting. Dan Rather being felled after that scandal, and how that culture has changed within the D.C. press corps, particularly in the last 8 years, where if you do something that is patently unethical, not just make a mistake and it refuse to admit it, but patently unethical, you just walk past it like it didn't happen. When it becomes too difficult to defend, then you just move on to the next thing. That seems to be the damage control approach now, as opposed to trying to present any sort of accountability that suggests that you value your integrity, because it's all just about being a political operative for your side now. And of course, in D.C., that's the Democrats all the time, every time. But I did want to get to the Benghazi piece that you write about, because it's important. And this former CIA spy named Tyler Drumheller, and just how that Benghazi story that started to get too close to Hillary Clinton when she was looking at running for president, and how sort of, it's a great story of intrigue and manipulation, and it included Bill Owens, the sainted Bill Owens now, and how that works to derail a story that would be politically damaging to somebody that you're otherwise trying to advance.
Yeah. So basically the story is this. It involves a lot of moving parts, and I would encourage you to go to the Federalist and read that story. I think it was also linked on Real Clear Politics as well. But basically the deal is this: it was a major scandal when it happened, and in the fall of 2013, remember this is a year after the Benghazi scandal, where 4 people died in Benghazi, Libya, at an embassy that was attacked on September 11th by an Al-Qaeda affiliated terror group. CBS ran a story about the Benghazi scandal, and that story was done by CBS 60 Minutes reporter Lara Logan, who's no longer with the network. And it was all about this. It was this, searing eyewitness testimony about how the U.S. could have and should have done a lot more, to save the people that died that day, from the perspective of a guy that was there, allegedly. Well, shortly after the story is run on air, a story that makes Hillary Clinton look very bad, it comes out that the guy who was at the heart of their report apparently isn't very trustworthy, and he told a bunch of people different conflicting things that he had told CBS. And CBS, goes so far as to pull the transcript of the broadcast off of news services because they can't stand behind it. Laura Logan takes a leave of the network, and it's all a big black eye. And meanwhile, Hillary Clinton's defenders are like, see, people are out there spreading all these lies about it. What we didn't know until a couple years later when I reported this, which is that there was a man named Tyler Drumheller, who was formerly the head of the CIA's head of clandestine operations in Europe, a rather checkered record. George Tenet, the former CIA director under both Bush and Clinton, he wrote several pages in his book dedicated to tearing apart Drumheller as being this unreliable guy who nobody should listen to. But Drumheller had been hired by 60 Minutes as a consultant who had worked on this Benghazi story, and according to people I talked to at CBS and 60 Minutes, Drumheller was instrumental in changing the entire nature of the report from something that was attacking Hillary Clinton for denying that Al-Qaeda was involved in the report, involved in Benghazi, because she originally said, this had nothing to do with Al-Qaeda. This was, people were upset about this blasphemous YouTube video, which really wasn't true at all, and making it about this unreliable guy's testimony. Well, it turned out, we didn't find out till 2015, that, when I reported that this guy Drumheller was also basically on Hillary Clinton's payroll. He was working together with a former special forces colonel, this dodgy private military mercenary company, and Sidney Blumenthal, a longtime Clinton aide, to basically get government contracts when she was at the State Department, to rebuild Libya after the bombing campaign in the Obama administration. So he was simultaneously on the payroll of Hillary Clinton, pitching his intelligence services and other things, and at the same time, he was advising 60 Minutes on how to cover Hillary Clinton.
Right. So steering them away from the narrative that Lara Logan was initially interested in pursuing.
Yes, exactly. And the other guy that he was working with, Sidney Blumenthal, is a longtime Clinton aide, is one of the most notorious dirty tricksters on politics. He's like the Democratic Roger Stone. He was the guy actually that came up with birtherism and suggested that Obama's birth certificate was not legitimate. That was when Hillary Clinton was running against him in 2008. That was all Sidney Blumenthal before it spread to the right wing. He's a really dastardly guy. And if you had told me, how would Sidney Blumenthal come up with a plan to discredit a 60 Minutes report that's going to make Hillary Clinton look really bad, I mean, it looked exactly like what happened. There's no question about this. And, one of the interesting details about that report that I did in 2015, laying all this out, and which I didn't think much about at the time, but I noted in there that 60 Minutes producer Bill Owens was Tyler Drumheller's closest person at the network. And so when when they were making big fanfare about him, I remembered, that Bill Owens. And the crazy thing about this is he was at the heart of this insane Lara Logan scandal, which, again, should have been discrediting to the network. It was a huge story at the time. And just a couple of years later, they made him, he went from, regular executive producer to being head of the entire program.
And in your piece, too, I mean, like the conflicts and the skullduggery here is pretty obvious. I mean, it doesn't take that much dot connecting. But you also say in your piece, I'm sure over the years, if we look back, the 60 Minutes has done some good pieces. Yeah, I'm sure that's true. But when it comes to politics now, or maybe since Rathergate, I don't know where you would draw the lines. I mean, is there anything that we can trust is on the level with these outlets like 60 Minutes, these the sort of legacy media inside the Beltway and up and down the Eastern Seaboard?
I mean, the idea that something like Rathergate would have happened 20 years ago, and we're still consistently seeing scandals that run in one direction from these people, the answer is no. I mean, there's anything involving like major national politics, it is clear that they are irredeemably partisan, unless, of course, it's, the most obvious issue in the world. But, I mean, just the way that they frame, we just saw how they handled Mark Elias, of all people.
Yeah.
I mean, for crying out loud, if there's one person on the Democratic side, everybody could step back and agree, okay, well, look, that guy's not on the up and up. It would be Mark Elias. And somehow, they go out of their way to portray him as this, sainted, crusader who's, beating back that, evil, nasty man, Donald Trump that, a majority of the American people voted for. I mean, it's absolute insanity to approach a man like Mark Elias without a great deal of skepticism, and that's exactly what they're doing. So, no, you can't trust them is the answer.
Mark Hemingway, senior writer at RealClearInvestigations.com and book editor at TheFederalist.com, where you can find his recent piece that we were talking about, the downfall of 60 Minutes and the biggest media scandal you've never heard of, which you have now. Mark, thanks for joining us. As always, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
They took everything. Our equipment, our supplies, it's all gone.
It's devastating. Every order is going to be delayed for months, and our customers are going to find someone else.
I don't know if we'll ever recover from this. We're already getting calls from clients checking